Okay. Welcome to everyone that is already online. We just have 2 more minutes and then we'll get the meeting started. I also want to put okay. I made a document with important dates from Ryan Bartlett. So hold on a minute. And I want to come over here to see what my agenda looks like. There we go. Okay. Okay. I think I have everything needed. Okay. I hope so. We'll see
Mhm.
how this all works out.
It's probably a good afternoon to try it.
Yeah. Okay. We'll start in 1 minute. I like to start my meetings on time. That way I honor everybody being here and I'm ready to go. Let's see here. Okay. Let me turn my phone off and then we'll get moving here. Hello, Jordan. Thank you for being here. Appreciate it. Are
Hi,
you
Betty. My
able
pleasure.
to, do you have documents you need to share?
I just have a couple of things that I was hoping to show folks. Yeah, so it'd be great if I could get share access.
Okay. Let's see here. Are you able to now? Do you see it? Mm.
Yep, I do. Thank
Okay,
you.
awesome. Awesome. Okay. Welcome, everyone. I appreciate everybody being here on time. My name again, Betty Jimenez. I'm glad to see a lot of people here online. Just due to some emails coming through, people were going on vacation, so I wanted to honor everybody's time in trying to get out on the road or to the airport. So we're going to go ahead and start right away. I'm looking this way because I have the agenda over here. So I am going to share some important dates that everybody gets, but I do also know that sometimes it's hard to remember some of those dates that come through. And so I'm just going to go quickly over it. I'm not going to go into depth. So if you want to write down when they were emailed, because I'll give you the date and the time and just kind of review quickly what it was. So on January 12th at 11:59 a.m., there was an email regarding the 2026 U.S. Presidential Scholars Program. This is going to be for the high schools. So if you kind of want to look at that to see what the parameters are if you're at a high school, that'll help some of your kids. A lot of that is just for kids that may or may not, well, that usually aren't going to be nominated or, oh, maybe we should have this child, apply for XYZ. So that way, this will help some of those students. Then also on January 15th, 2026 at 10:25 a.m., another email. Again, these are emails coming from Ryan Bartlett. It's the Purple Star Schools application. It's open from January 15th to March 30th. So just wanted to kind of put that on your radar again, high schools. And let me back up to the Presidential Scholarship Program. That's a quick turnaround. January 26th, all that has to be. So if you just look through your emails, you should have those emails from Ryan. And then the other one is it was emailed today at 10:04 a.m. It's the Presidential 1776 Award for our students. Again, it doesn't say if it's just seniors. I believe it's just high school students. But if you want to go in, kind of look at those things and see if any of that applies to you or to your schools. So on that note, I am going to go ahead and turn this over to Jordan Dehan. I hope I'm not going to mess up your name. Magali? Magali?
Very close.
Oh,
Jordan Dahan Mangale is my
okay.
name. It's a
Dehan
pleasure to be
Magali.
here. Thank you so much, Betty. For those of you I don't know, and I recognize some of you, and I recognize some of your names, my name is Jordan Dahan Mangale, as I said, and I work at the Utah State Board of Education in the special education section. I am the personnel preparation coordinator, so me and my team, we help support Apple SPED, which you're likely familiar with, the special education eligibility evaluation endorsement, or SPEDE, and the alternate route to licensure for speech language technicians. So I asked for a little bit of time today because we have an exciting opportunity that we are excited to share with our charter directors. So I know that Liz, for example, definitely knows what the CEC is, but in case you don't know, the Council for Exceptional Children, or CEC, is among the premier organizations in our country for, I saw Liz's thumbs up, for technical assistance and support and research around students with disabilities. And they host an annual convention. And last year it was hosted in Baltimore, and we're excited because this year it's in Salt Lake City. So we're presented with a really cool opportunity to combine some programming. And so with that in mind, my team and I looked to the CEC and we asked, hey, what can we do for our Apple SPED participants to help to support their growth as new special education teachers? And so what we did is we worked with the CEC to create some special sessions that are offered outside of class hours. And I'm going to share a little bit of a write-up with you. I don't have a flyer yet because this is pretty new for our charter directors, but I'll get one to you. Let me share my screen so I can show you some of the details. Okay. So what exactly is this? Well, what we're doing is we're looking to create some special sessions that are outside of normal class hours so that people don't have to get subs. So Friday evening, on Friday the 13th, March 13th, and Saturday morning, we are offering free registration to special sessions for our Apple SPED participants. We were trying to think outside of the box in terms of like who else can we help capture as part of this great opportunity that we have to offer free registration for like this special part of the CEC. Unfortunately, it's not complete registration for the entire conference, just these special sessions, but it's a great opportunity. And we decided to open it up to special education directors and charter directors once our Apple SPED participants have been able to sign up. So we just made this decision last Friday. Betty was good enough to put me really quickly on your agenda so that I could share this information with you. More information will be forthcoming once we have a flyer ready for our charter directors and our special education directors. But I wanted to show some of the details to you and provide you with some information about what the sessions actually are that are being offered. So I'm not going to read this to you. I know you know how to read. But essentially what we're trying to do is bring mentors, Apple SPED participants, charter directors, and special education directors, as well as our Apple SPED completers together for these sessions because that will evoke some nice conversation among LEAs. So registration, if you look at the bottom, we have our registration closing for our Apple SPED participants on February 20th. So it's about a month out when registration will close. At which point we're going to open up registration to charter directors and special education directors. There'll be a window of time where you all can register and sign up for these special sessions for free. We're able to offer licensing credits for that through the CEC. We'll get a list of the people who attended, and we'll make sure that that gets taken care of. Some of the sessions. Let's see, give me a second so I can stop sharing this screen and share a different one. Please hold. There we go. This is not the screen I want to show you, but it's another tab right next to it. Let's go straight to my website. Okay, so they created a special landing page just for this program, the CEC did, so that we could get folks signed up. So you'll see there's I think there's 21 different sessions that are offered. There's lots of different topics that are going to be covered. Anything from empowering teachers to secondary literacy, creating inclusive and supportive classrooms, accessibility, paraeducators and building the educator pipeline, culture responsive induction and mentoring. There's a lot of really PBIS, because I know that Chris Ann is here today, adapting PBIS and ABA for complex learners. So there's a lot of really great opportunity to learn and grow and have conversation. So we're happy to offer this. If you have any questions, I'm going to put my contact information in the chat. But you can expect to see a flyer outlining this more fully in the coming weeks, as well as an email with a registration link, and I'll re-provide that information about it again. I'll provide Betty with that little write-up that I was showing you all so that you'll have access to it, so you don't have to memorize all the details or jot them down. But I wanted to just pause and see, are there any immediate questions? I'm more than happy to answer.
Forgive me, Jordan, did you say it's in person or Zoom?
It is in person. Yep. Live, direct, Salt Lake City at the I think it's at the Salt Palace Convention Center. I should know that.
And exceptional students, is that right? The Center for
Council for,
Oh.
yes, sorry, Council for Exceptional Children, CEC.
And so is that equivalent to like twice exceptional, kind of that area of needs?
It's a great question.
For that.
Yeah, so Council for Exceptional Children, it doesn't look specifically or uniquely at twice exceptional students. It's for all students with disabilities. Any other questions, friends? Thanks, Liz. It is a great opportunity. I'm really excited that we're doing it. I hope we get a really great response from our charter directors, especially, like from Spectrum, who serves so many students with disabilities.
Okay, are there any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you so much, Jordan. I appreciate it.
you.
You have a wonderful weekend.
Thanks for the time. You all too.
Oh, yeah.
Bye.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and present Cassie Hayes. And she is, I said your name correct, right? Like making
Yes.
sure. And she's with USBE, and she's going to talk to us about, I'm sorry, I was like, whoa, parents and engagement. Welcome, Cassie. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully this works because I've got two screens and sometimes it's a little crazy. My name is Cassie Hayes, and I'm the parent liaison for the State Office of Education and parent engagement specialist. I actually know a lot of you. I built and ran a charter school for 10 years and loved that experience so much. And also, by the way, I am the Purple Schools, Purple Star Schools contact too. So if you need that, let me know. And so we're looking forward to getting a lot of applications. It's crazy. So many schools are putting in applications. So I'm super excited about that, and a lot of charter schools. So that's fun. So I wanted to start with talking about how important parent engagement is, because I think if I were to say one thing, and I'm not saying this because this is my position, I'm truly saying this because now that I've been in education, this is my 30th year in education, running multiple programs. I think it's one of, if not the most important components for education, because it is such a foundational piece to creating good school culture and just engagement overall. So let's go. So the objective is to just get started and try and keep some momentum going on it. Parent engagement can be daunting, but at the same time, you get so much bang for your buck if you try to pull all the pieces together and try and keep rolling on it. The upfront investment is going to give you exponential return on investment. One thing I always like to say, though, is don't forget the people. Sometimes I think in education, we let the process become bigger than the end goal. Sometimes we're so involved in the process that we forget about what the end goal is. And one of the goals here is to try to implement it holistically for your school, but also don't forget the individuals, that we're really trying to focus on those students as individual people. And I think that's one of the reasons we had such a good culture at my school is because we were really focusing on the kids as whole children and their needs across the board. All right. You know what? There's this banner and it won't let me read this. Okay, so why does it matter? Number one, this is one of the top complaints that we're getting from all directors and superintendents is that absenteeism is really hard. And we've got an the whole absentee campaign that's going on. They're trying to pull those rates down by 50% within 5 years. And so I'm on that group. And it's really hard right now. I think part of it is because, the data is a little bit hard just trying to and I think they'll fix that soon, trying to navigate what is absenteeism for like online schools, those kinds of things, trying to determine what that is so that you can get good data and measure that. But schools that have strong family school partnerships have measurable gains in attendance reductions and chronic absenteeism, as well as increased performance. They usually have higher test scores and grades, and they will be more likely to graduate and enroll in advanced and higher ed programs. They have reduced achievement gaps, which is great. I mean, this is seriously, it's checking off every box that you have that are issues. And then this is another one that is one of the top concerns for superintendents and charters is that behaviors are hard right now. And so this is a way of fixing that and pulling those levels down so that you have better classroom behavior and overall building school culture, like I said. And then it also increases educator job satisfaction, which is also a huge component for us and trying to retain really good teachers because it increases trust, classroom behaviors, and the educators just feel more connected. All right, what does it look like? Here's one thing that I may say that I think super important, especially for charter schools, because my heart is with charter schools. Engagement can look very different from school to school. Every school is different. And that's why you all created charter schools and are part of charter schools is because we're trying to produce different situations for students, different opportunities for students. The demographics and the school culture, family needs, special needs, like you need to look at all of that. What are your demographics? Where are you located? That goes back to local control. And that's why the state believes so heavily in local control is because there are unique needs in different areas of the state. Look at local parent-teacher relationships, your community resources, and then funding. And I will say this, you don't really need a lot of funding to do parent engagement. It's really about the little practices from day to day versus a big initiative. All right, overcoming challenges and barriers. And this is where I want to know what you guys have to say. Tell me what specific in the chat. Give me just a couple of lines of what are your biggest challenges and barriers with your parents and your families? Where are you finding the biggest barriers when you're trying to connect with your families? I'm going to give a couple of seconds for you guys to put some stuff in there. A lot of it is time constraint. Nowadays, we have families who are working 2 jobs, sometimes overnight, right? Time, exactly. Time. It's really hard to sometimes find ways of connecting with parents because of the time and all of the other things that you have in place. All of the other requirements that you have, believe me, I know you have a lot of things. And also, yeah, that's right. Your parents do not come to the school as you ask. Cultural and language differences that can be, just communication can be difficult because we have such an influx of different cultural, like barriers that we're having within the schools. preconceived biases sometimes, perceptions about parents and families, and honestly, their perceptions about education, if they've had a rough go before with educators or education process. And I'm like the parent liaison, so I get parents calling me all the time with complaints. And some of their worries are really just misunderstanding. They just don't understand how the education system works. So this is another reason that engagement is very important. Lack of confidence or understanding, that's goes to that. Parents are sometimes they feel intimidated by the educational process. They don't know how things work. And we're doing our due diligence by posting things on our website, but at the same time, it's still very difficult for them to navigate through some of those things and the processes. We've been in it for a long time, so we understand how it works, but they don't necessarily. Socioeconomic factors, poverty, transportation issues. Sometimes the parents don't show up because they don't have transportation. Sometimes they're, like I said, they're working all night. So when do you talk to them? They're sleeping during the day. Whoops, sorry. If you could also, thank you for all of these answers, taking students out for a week to travel in the middle of the year. Yeah, that's a thing, actually. I've had a lot of parents call me and say, what do I do so I can we're going to travel for 6 months. And so, yeah, mental health is a huge thing right now. Yeah, I have one of my own, I've had that in my own family dealing with that. That's difficult. Tell me what you think, though, that some of the assets are that your parents bring to you. If we have that kind of a mindset going into looking at this, what are some of the assets that you feel like your parents bring to the plate, to the situation? Yeah, they love their children. I mean, honestly, that's one of the biggest ones, right? Um, I always say I've got two boys. They're both over 6 feet and they're huge kids. And I would jump in front of a bear, if a bear tried to get them, I would be like the one, and here I am smaller than them. I'd still be trying to protect them. And they're like in their mid-20s. So there's a huge love for kids. Perspective of what their children need. Yes, they know their kids, right? Aren't we the first teachers? Aren't parents the first teachers? And we're any one of you, not all of you are going to be parents or grandparents, and I hear that you love your grandkids more than your kids. That's the rumor. But would you not just do anything that you could to help your child if they were struggling? And I'm not going to lie, I actually built my charter school because of my oldest child. My oldest child was a square peg trying to fit in a round hole, and we were having a lot of problems. And so that's why I built this school. So, I mean, you'll go to big expenses and extents to help your kids. Problem solving mindset, that's great. And they really will. They will do anything. Like I said, if people like me will build charter schools for their children, then there are a lot of invested parents. Trusting relationship with teachers and yep, and you've got to build those. So that's such a good lead into this. So let's look at some of the key components of effective engagement. Number one, trust. That's what Liz is saying. Building partnerships and trust. That's one of the most important first steps. This is kind of an overview, but collaborating, decision-making, and advocacy, focusing on two-way communication. We're going to talk about these in depth. Build the capacity of both families and staff, not just the families, but also the staff. Creating welcoming and inclusive climates and build community partnerships, inclusive school culture and resources. Okay, so how do we do this? Big picture ideas. Okay, now I know this is stuff that you guys are like, this is just common sense. You should just know this, but really, really kind of look at these. I'm asking you as a favor, really look at these and think about it and think, how, as leaders, can I implement these things in a consistent and intentional manner in my school instead of just kind of checking off the box, right? I mean, I think we get so busy with all the stuff that we have to do, but how do we do this without just checking off the box, but really do it intentionally? Building trust and relationships. That's one of the biggest ones, because if you don't have the parents' trust, you can't really go forward very well. So you have to assess family needs. You have to see where are they at, and you have to meet them where they're at. It's hard for families to come to you all the time. Sometimes we have to meet them in places that are a little bit more difficult. Some of those are going to be like going to the extent of having home visits. Listen to the families first. Like instead of like telling the families, we need to listen first. See what their experiences are. What experiences have they had in the past? You know, maybe they have walls up about certain situations. Try and figure out what those are. Stay positive. That's another thing. How many times do we just call the parent with bad news about the kid, you know, misbehaving or whatever, instead of good news and say, hey, I just want you to know that your child did this. Sometimes that turns everything around. Just that one little phone call about something positive that their child did. I'm going to go down here to effective and accessible communication. Sometimes our communication is just not good. Sometimes we're emailing, and I know we feel the same way sometimes, right? You just get emailed to death. The parents can't always, maybe they don't even use email. You got to start trying to figure out how are these parents communicating using multiple modes. And I know we do that, but you know, like that really is a time killer too. If you can't figure out where are your parents actually, you know, where's the best way to communicate to them? If you're just doing all the things, newspaper or newsletters and emails and all the things, it's a lot of time. But if you can figure out where you're getting the most bang for your buck, that can help. And then also trying to communicate with them on their time schedule too, trying to figure out, you know, like if, and then that would be more the teacher level. If the teacher can figure out, you know, this parent isn't available then. Involvement, I'm going to talk, engagement is what we're wanting, but you have to start with involvement. So somehow you got to get your parents on campus and meeting you and talking to you. You got to figure out how can we create events. And the sad thing is I think that in a lot of schools, we stop at the involvement part. It's like, oh, come on and help with the book fair. And then it's over. There's no more engagement. That's the extent of the engagement. That's not engagement. That's involvement. That's parents say engagement is when they're sitting there and they're trying to help figure out what policies should be, what procedures should be, trying to figure out what efficacy is for the school. So empowerment and shared decision making, like letting them help you make decisions because then they become invested in the process for their child. How can they be assets? Giving them leadership roles is super important. The best parent engagement places that I've seen in districts and in charter schools are where they have someone in place that was a new parent, came in, got engaged, became an advocate for the school, and then they help bring in new families and other families who don't feel comfortable, especially when it comes to cultural differences. So if you have ELA and you have maybe Latino families that don't speak English, and then you have someone that can bridge that gap. Okay. Oh, and I will say this back here on this other trying to create ways for them to have a feedback loop. And we'll talk about that. I think that's super, super important. And I will say that that was one of the biggest things I did that I think helped my school. Classroom integration. Now this goes down to the teacher level, but as leaders, you have to create time for your teachers to be able to communicate to their families. So I advocate for trying to create like a period of time, you know, one afternoon a week so that they can call 5 of their parents, you know, consistently. Can they call on the phone and actually chat with their parents? That's not so hard at the elementary level. I know it gets harder at the upper grade level, and my school is K through 12, so I get that because it's like I've got over 120 students. I understand that, but you can still be consistent. And those older kids need the engagement just as much as the younger kids do. And you know that the parents fall off more once you get into like, you know, as the higher you go, the more the parents fall off in engagement. And actually, there is tons of research showing that middle school and high school kids need just as much engagement as the elementary kids do. So also providing ongoing professional development, Don't leave your stuff out there to just like wander around and try and figure this out. It has to be systemic. You have to create good practices and look for improvement. All right, so this is what I'm going to tell you. These are just things, there's like 7 or 8 things that you can do right now, super easy, no real cost, that will help. A feedback form. Now, I'm the one that takes all the parent complaints, and a lot of people are just putting, like the hotline complaint on your website. Why would you do that when you would like to know what the problem is? Why do I want to know what the problem is, or the state level know what the problem is, when it's something we just throw it back to you guys anyway if it's not been dealt with at the LEA level? So create a feedback form. Don't call it a complaint form, just call it a feedback form. Like, put your information in here. What are your concerns? What questions do you have? If you have concerns, questions, or you want to give positive feedback, encourage positive feedback, because even you guys would like to hear some positive feedback once in a while. That was one of the best things I ever did, was have a feedback form. Parent web page. Have a dedicated place for parents to go so that they can find some of these resources, so they don't have to dig all over your website. That's sometimes one of the hard things that's so easy to fix. Instead of them calling us and saying, I can't find these policies and stuff, just put it on their parent page. The teacher calls, which we talked about, being consistent. You got to follow through and be consistent. Consistency matters. Quality over quantity matters. Classroom meets. Make sure that your classrooms and your schools are welcome to parents and families. Of course, be safe. I get all that in today's day and age, but make it so that your campus is welcoming, so that parents can come in. You still have your protective measures, but parents can come on site and be part of your school. Identify a parent contact level that we were talking about earlier. If you have someone that the parents can contact besides your poor secretary, so that they can, get some specific answers for parents, that is a great way. And then home visits, obviously, there are some components at Title I levels and special ed where you can, they can train you on home visits for some of, like really chronic absenteeism and stuff. Make sure you get training for that. There are people at our agency that do that. Susie Estrada can help you with that, and I'll give you her contact information if you would like to do that. And just so you know, home visits for those chronic absenteeisms, if you can remedy those situations, it bleeds out through your entire school. Data shows that it will improve your entire school. Here's all the things that I think, and I'm sending you this PowerPoint so that you have this. You don't have to read all this right now, but these are the really important things that you need to have when you have good parent engagement. All right, so here's my information. I run the parent portal, and then I also have a parent and family engagement for educators, which just has a ton of resources for you. This is Susie's information. Like I said, she works under special ed with Title I, and she's in the school improvement program, and she's also she has a very long title, but she works under special education and with Title I, so she can help you. And then also, here are some tools for you to get started. Keep in mind, these are not nothing set in stone. You know your families, so utilize these forms, change them as you need for your families. But these are just some, after I've looked at all the frameworks, there's so many frameworks out there, and it's kind of a new catchphrase, right? Parent engagement. There's so many frameworks, so much data out there. So I tried to pull all of it into these for you and just put them in one little document, one for your parents, one for you as a leader, one for teachers, the key components, and sort of a sample rubric to help you figure out where are we with our parent engagement. And that is it. There's some resources, and I'm sending you right now the link into the chat. You're welcome to contact me anytime for all sorts of things. I have people call me all sorts of things for all sorts of questions. So feel free.
Thank you so much, Cassie. Are there any questions before she leaves or stops her presentation? Not leaves, but Okay. Thank you so much. I appreciate your time.
And thank you guys for being involved. I appreciate it very much. I know how hard
Lovely.
you guys all work.
Awesome. Okay, now we're going to have Chris Ann Lewis from the Utah State Board of Education, and her presentation is going to be regulation changes, school-based mental health and emergency safety interventions. Chris Ann, there you go. All right. Thank you so much.
Hi, everybody. My name is Chris Ann, and I am so happy to be here with all of you today. Thank you for spending your Friday afternoon. I am sure that there is nothing more you all want to talk about late on a Friday afternoon than regulations. So, what I am going to, I'm going to stop for just a second and make sure that we can get this shared with you. So what we're going to talk about today are changes to emergency safety interventions and changes to mental health regulations that happened during the 2025 legislative session. And I realize that the 2025 legislative session was a while ago, almost a year ago. We have the new session starting tomorrow. We are all so excited for that. But we still get so many questions on this that I just wanted to make sure that I had given you all the opportunity to ask any questions that you have. I really would like this to be more of a discussion rather than me just talking to you, because I'm sure you already know a lot of this information. So as I'm talking, if you have very specific questions, or if you just want to talk about a specific topic a little bit more, please let me know so that I can tailor what I'm talking about to that. And my computer right now, there we go. Hopefully you can all see the slides. Hopefully those are showing up now. But we're going to go ahead and start out with the emergency safety interventions. So there's been one code and then kind of two USBE rules that have changed, or that did change in 2025. The primary board rule that looks at emergency safety interventions is R277608. This used to be part of R277609, but those were split. So 609 now deals more with discipline, and 608 deals with emergency safety interventions. And the reason why those were split is because we wanted to make it very clear that emergency safety interventions are not a form of discipline, and we didn't want them to be associated with discipline. And then Utah Code Section 53G8-301 is the bill, the law that relates to emergency safety interventions. And then I also have our LRBI up here. Our LRBI is in the process of being edited and finalized. So there is not a current link to it, which is why I didn't link it here. It seems like it's been taking forever for that to happen. Hopefully we'll have that out to you very soon. But in the meantime, we have the 2023 version. So as we start talking about emergency safety interventions, I just wanted to highlight some of the considerations for both physical restraint and seclusion. So ESIs can only be used when a student presents an immediate and significant threat. So immediate and significant are the key words there, to self or others, and when no other safe and effective intervention is available. That means you had to have exhausted all other interventions prior to using a physical restraint or a seclusion. And then school employees must use any and all less restrictive or least restrictive interventions prior to those ESIs. The next bullet point has to do with our comprehensive ESI training. And I am curious what you all are using to meet the requirements of this comprehensive ESI training. And if you are training all of your staff or just part of your staff in these physical holds and seclusion. Okay, so Katrina is using MANT. That's a pretty common one. Lots of MANT. Safety care. Lots of MANT going on. And then Malia said about half of the staff is trained to use those emergency safety interventions. And that's pretty common. What we're seeing with a lot of schools is that they are not training all of their staff. Not everyone is trained for the comprehensive ESI. There is, in case you are unaware, every staff that has the possibility of supervising students must have the foundational behavior training. They all have to be trained in that. But the second part, this comprehensive ESI training, a lot of our schools are only training designated staff who work in a situation where they may have to use an emergency safety intervention. And that's up to each school to decide, who they're training for that. But I would strongly recommend having at least a few staff members who are trained just in case you ever have the need to use it. Hopefully you won't, but just in case you have those staff who are trained. And then, of course, ESIs carry significant risk of harm to both students and staff, and that's both emotional harm and physical harm. Okay, so there are practices that are prohibited in code and rule. Corporal punishment, I'm sure we all know, is prohibited, and then you cannot ever use an ESI as a means of discipline or punishment. Seclusion specifically cannot be used for coercion or for humiliation. It cannot be used due to inadequate staffing. I'm sure we all know this. We cannot seclude a student because we don't have enough staff to cover the classroom that day. It can't be used for staff member convenience. And then this is brand new in the 2025 legislation, is that seclusion cannot be used with students below first grade. So if you have preschool students in your school and kindergarten students, seclusion cannot be used with those students. They can only be used with students who are first grade or older. Chemical restraint, this is also new, is now prohibited in all circumstances. And mechanical restraint is prohibited with certain exceptions. And those exceptions are things like seatbelts. It would be any kind of postural device, any kind of assistive technology that is specifically prescribed by a related service provider or by a medical professional. And then prone and supine restraint, those are any restraints that are on the floor. So if you have a student who is face down on the floor or face up on the floor, both of those are specifically prohibited. And then you cannot seclude a student behind a locked door. Any questions about these prohibitions before we move forward? All right. Hopefully all of this should be pretty familiar to you, just a little bit of a review. And then other dangerous practices, these are outlined in the LRBI and include things like applying pressure to a student's chest, neck, throat, back, sitting on or straddling any part of the student's body. And the most common thing that we see in this area is that a student is maybe kicking while they're in a physical restraint. And so someone sits on their legs to prevent them from kicking. And that is prohibited. That should not be done. Anything that obstructs circulation, including, again, sitting on a student's legs and putting a student off balance or forcing them to the floor. Covering or manipulating the student's face or threatening to cover their face to gain compliance, and then any kind of pain compliance, anything that is causing them pain. And then one thing to note is that if a student was ever at any point during the ESI in physical distress or unwell, then they must be assessed by a school health personnel, and then the results of that must be provided to the parents. Some limitations: ESIs are not effective in reducing long-term occurrence of behaviors. We know that they don't teach behavior. There is a time and a place. I'm not saying don't ever use them. I'm just saying use them with caution and don't expect that they will change or improve behaviors. What we actually see and what research is supporting is that ESIs, in the majority of cases, will actually increase the number of behaviors that you see with a lot of students. So you want to keep that in mind and, again, use those ESIs only as a last resort. They should never be used for noncompliance, disrespect, disobedience, misuse, or destruction of property. And the only exception to that is if with that destruction of property, it poses a risk of physical safety to others. And then one thing, again, that I want to cover is that staff should, if a student is self-harming or has a history of self-harm, seclusion should only be used with the utmost caution. And of course, any device or object that the student could use for self-harming should be removed before they are placed in seclusion. And then specifically for students with disabilities, ESIs may not be written into an IEP as a planned intervention unless the IEP team agrees that all other options have been exhausted, all other interventions have been attempted. There is a functional behavior assessment that has been completed, and you have a positive intervention, positive behavior interventions based off of data analysis are also written into the plan and also implemented. I will say that this is pretty rare across the state for any kind of ESI to be written into an IEP. And I would use extreme caution if you do decide to do that. Just make sure that you have followed all of the requirements of the law.
Chrisanne, sorry,
Yes.
I apologize for interrupting.
Oh,
To
no problem.
clarify
Please
then,
ask questions. Please interrupt.
the ESI is then, okay, just to clarify, the ESI, is it then written into the BIP or is it its own entity? Because I assume ESI is part of the safety plan, right?
Yes. And you don't have to write an ESI into a safety plan. And I would be hesitant to write it into a BIP or an IEP as a planned intervention. You could put it in as an option when the student is, an immediate and significant risk. But what they're talking about specifically on this slide is saying, if the student, after the student hits 3 times in a day, then the staff will put them in seclusion and using it as an intervention rather than as a safety measure. Does that help to clarify where that comes in? Okay. Yeah, so absolutely. And I will say that it doesn't necessarily have to be part of a safety plan because the law does allow for it to be used when a student is in an immediate and significant risk. So you don't have to write it in, but you can. And a lot of times it's helpful, especially for parents, so that they are understanding, the consequences and what may happen when the student is a safety risk. Okay. And then for students who have multiple ESIs, so if you have a student who has had a number of ESIs over time, or if they have multiple behavior incidents that maybe haven't resulted in an ESI, but those behaviors are continuing, they're continuing to occur. You do want to have the team review the student's IEP and make any changes as necessary. So some of those changes might be to accommodations or modifications, services, placement, etc. What you don't want to do is if you have a student who's continuing to have behaviors, you don't want to just let that go and just continue to monitor it for months and months and months on end. You really want to make sure that you're making those changes and that you're evaluating the plan for the student frequently enough that you can make changes if what you have planned isn't working. And then if you have students who have multiple behaviors, if they have repeated behaviors, then a functional behavior assessment must be completed and then used to determine if a behavior intervention plan is needed. And if a BIP is already in place, or I would also say if an FBA has occurred, but is covering a behavior that is significantly different than what you're seeing now, then you may want to consider doing a new FBA and then making changes to the BIP as necessary. So for example, if an FBA was written because a student was disruptive in class, they were maybe tearing up materials, pushing over furniture, and you had an FBA and a BIP in place for that, and then you start to see more aggressive behavior. So the student is kicking and hitting, then the team may want to consider conducting a new BIP for that new behavior and or amending the current BIP to account for that new behavior and to put new interventions in place. So we're going to move on now to physical restraints. So the definition of a physical restraint is a personal restriction that immobilizes or significantly reduces the ability of a student to move their arms, legs, body, or head freely. So one of the common questions that I get is if we put a student maybe in the far corner of the classroom because they elope, in order to keep them or to slow down the time that it takes them to get to the door, would that be considered a physical restraint because you've got furniture in the way? And I'm interested in your answer. What do you think in that specific circumstance?
Yeah, that feels like a restraint.
Okay. Any other thoughts on that? So generally, if you have a student, maybe they're seated with their desk in front of them and they're seated away from the door, just to slow them down to getting to the door, it would not be considered a physical restraint, as long as the student has the freedom to move out of that space on their own. It may slow them down so that you have a little bit more time to intervene before they open the classroom door and leave and start running away. But they still have that option to move around the classroom, to get up out of their desk, to stand up at their desk if they want to. So that would typically not be considered a physical restraint. All right, so reasonable and necessary physical restraint, that's language directly from the code, may only be used in self-defense to obtain the possession of a weapon or other dangerous object, to protect a student or another individual from physical injury, to remove a student who is violent, to protect property from being damaged when physical safety is at risk. And then this does not include physical escort or physical prompt. So if it's necessary to move a student out of the classroom using a physical escort, or let's say that you're working on fine motor skills, working on cutting with a student, and you do hand over hand, the code is very clear that neither one of those incidents or circumstances is considered a physical restraint. So physical restraint must be terminated, must only be used for the minimum amount of time necessary to ensure safety. And then I really like that this piece was added to the most recent law. It says, as reasonably understood by the school employee, because that was something that was really up in the air and a little bit unclear. And it's really hard to draw a firm black and white line. So it does allow the school employee to have a little bit of discretion as to when a physical restraint is used. And then the physical restraint must be stopped at the soonest of the following. So the amount of time described in the school's ESI training. So let's say that the school has outlined that a student must be released after 15 minutes in a physical restraint, let's say. So that would, after 20 minutes, they would need to be released, even though the law says that it's allowable for up to 30 minutes. And then the second part is that the physical restraint must be terminated when law enforcement intervenes. And this is a change in the law. If you're familiar with it, prior to this, the law did say when law enforcement arrives. So the difference there is, in a lot of cases, law enforcement has arrived at the school and they have said that there's nothing that they can do to intervene. And so this does allow the schools a little bit more flexibility. So even if law enforcement is there and the student is continuing to be a safety risk, they can continue with that physical restraint, even though law enforcement is there. And then, of course, it must be immediately terminated if the student is in severe distress. So I am going to allow you to read through these. The only one I want to point out is that a physical restraint must allow for free communication using the student's primary mode of communication. So if you have a student that is using a communication device that maybe uses sign language to communicate, then you have to allow for that when you're using your physical restraint. You have to, leave the student's hands free, maybe while holding arms, so that they can push buttons or so that they can sign. The reason is because we want the student to be able to communicate when they're in distress. And this is something that that's new to a lot of schools. And so I just want to point that out and make sure that you are aware of this piece that's in the law. All right, before we move on to seclusion, any questions about physical restraint? Seclusion, the definition in law is the involuntary confinement of a student alone in a room or an area from which the student is physically prevented from leaving, including placing the student in a locked room where the door is blocked by furniture or held closed, by staff. So seclusion may be used as an ESI, again, only in grades 1 and higher, and when the following items are in the school policy. So I wanted to include all of these on this slide so that you all could then take this back and look at your school policy and make sure that all of these items have been included. We also have, just in case you're interested, we also have a policy checklist for ESIs, and that's linked at the end of the slide deck. So I can share that with you. It's just a checklist that you can use to go through your policies and make sure that they include all of the required elements. So your policy has to describe the circumstances under which a staff member may use seclusion. It has to describe which staff members are authorized to use seclusion. And I would recommend in this case, when you're outlining it, I would include something about those staff members having to complete that comprehensive emergency safety intervention training within the past year. You want to describe time limitations on the use of seclusion. Most schools are just going with the law and saying 30 minutes, but that's up to you if you want to make that shorter. And then you have to require immediate and continuous review of the decision to use seclusion. And most schools are using their ESI committees in order to do that. But again, you're welcome to develop any process that works for your school. You have to require documenting the use of seclusion. You have to describe the method, so the record keeping requirements. And then this is new to the law as well, is you have to require debriefing of all witnesses, including staff members, the student, and the parents of the students who were secluded. So you have to make sure that that debriefing has been completed, and that has to be part of your policy. You have to include that seclusion, or excuse me, an ESI can only be used when the student poses an immediate and significant threat, that you have to show that all least restrictive interventions have failed. And then in your policy, you have to include that a staff member who is familiar with the student is actively supervising the student for the duration of the seclusion. And again, this is something that is new to the 2025 regulations, that the staff member who is familiar with the student has to be actively supervising them at all times. And where this is a little bit difficult is you can't have someone who works at a different campus and who has never met the student, or maybe has only seen them once. They cannot be the person actively supervising. It has to be someone who is familiar with them. And then again, the time limit has to be 30 minutes max. So any questions on policy? So continuing with the use of seclusion, the seclusion can only be used for the minimum time necessary, and then it has to follow the policy. And then you have to ensure that any door remains unlocked, consistent with fire and building code requirements. And then I've listed some board rules there. Basically, what that says is if you do have a lock on the door, the lock has to self-release as soon as someone is not actively holding it. And so as soon as they let go of that lock, it has to pop open. That the reason for that is because if there were a fire or another type of emergency, let's say that the person holding the door had a heart attack or became incapacitated, then the student would not be trapped inside the room. Just by show of hands, you can raise your hands, using the Zoom feature, or you can just raise your hands. How many of you have a dedicated seclusion room in your schools? Okay, I can't see all of you, but we have at least one. Hi, Liz, who has her hand raised. So if you do have dedicated seclusion rooms in your schools, there are some new requirements. If you have that room, it has to be included in your school policy. Your school policy has to include a written description outlining why the school feels like that seclusion room is necessary. Typically, that just involves a statement like due to the population of students that we serve, they are likely at some point to engage in dangerous behaviors, so the seclusion room is needed. It does have to be approved by the LEA's governing board. And again, this is a brand new requirement. So if that hasn't happened, you want to make sure that that's documented somewhere in your board notes, that they have approved the use of a dedicated seclusion room. And then you have to distribute the requirements in written form to parents, outlining what the seclusion room looks like and your seclusion room policies. So the seclusion space, these are the physical requirements for a seclusion space. It should be inspected and prepared prior to use. It must be safe, clean, and well maintained. It has to meet fire and building safety requirements, and those are what we talked about in a few previous slides. It should be free of all objects except for those needed for communication. And this is a sticking point for some schools because you may be using an office or another space that has furniture or other items in it. And really the room, if you have a dedicated seclusion room, it should have none of that in it. It just should be an empty room. The only thing in there should be that communication device. You do have to have a window that permits continuous monitoring. We get asked, well, what if we have cameras that allow for that monitoring? And the code specifically says it has to have a window. And then we've talked about the locking requirements, that the lock must release on its own if it's not physically held closed. So some considerations, again, the student must be able to communicate in whatever method they use primarily while they're in seclusion. And I get asked frequently, well, this student uses a communication device on an iPad, and if we gave them that iPad while they're in seclusion, then they would throw it, or they might hurt themselves or someone else with it. The law is very specific that they have to be able to communicate. So what some schools have done is chosen to print out, let's say that they're using LAMP as their communication app. They've printed out the most important pages from LAMP, including things like help, it hurts, common phrases or common words that the student would need to use to indicate distress. And then they've provided that paper copy to the student while they're in seclusion rather than having that actual iPad or a larger device that could pose a safety risk. And then again, I want to emphasize that it is required to debrief all witnesses, that includes staff members, the student, and the parents after every single seclusion. And then seclusion must be terminated immediately as soon as the student no longer presents an immediate danger to self or others. And the biggest challenge or mistake maybe I see with this is that the student is calming down. Maybe the staff tells them, well, you need to have a safe body for 2 minutes before we open the door. And the law, again, is very clear that that is not allowable. As soon as the student is no longer a safety risk, then the door must be open and the student knows that they have the option to leave that space. It must be terminated if the student's in physical distress, if they start engaging in any type of self-injurious behavior, so biting themselves, scratching themselves, hitting themselves, if the student appears to be in any other way at risk of harm. And then the school employee may not place a student in seclusion for more than 30 minutes at a time. And I think I want to pause there. Actually, let's go back really quick because I want to pause on this 30-minute time limit because we get asked frequently, well, what happens if at 30 minutes that student is still posing an immediate and significant risk to their safety? The law does state that it states it in regards to physical restraint, but it also applies to seclusion, that it must be stopped and the staff must reassess the situation before beginning again. So what that looks like in case of a seclusion is the door must be opened. You can be doing the assessment prior to the 30 minutes. So while the student is still in seclusion at maybe minute 28, you can assess, well, okay, it doesn't look like they're calming down. You have to open the door and then you have to begin a second seclusion or a second physical restraint. So you cannot just continue the same one for longer than 30 minutes. You do have to stop, reassess, and then start again. So required documentation. Hopefully you all are familiar with USBE's Qualtrics survey, where we require that any ESI data be submitted. That deadline is actually today, yesterday on the 15th. So in October 15th and then again January 15th, all of your ESI data must have been submitted to that Qualtrics survey. If you don't know what I'm talking about, then reach out to me and I can help make sure that you have your data recorded in there. We will assess and look through all of that data in detail once it's been submitted. And then if we notice anything that may not be in compliance or anything that looks unusual, we will reach out to your school. We do have people that are assigned to each school. We'll reach out and ask any questions and then offer to provide any support. And I want to clarify, when I say that, it sounds like that we are, coming in as the police to, to look at these seclusions. And yes, we want to make sure that they're being used safely. But our primary reason for following up is to provide support to the schools. And we mean that genuinely. We don't want to come in and, bring down the hammer and make anyone think that they're doing anything wrong. We want to make sure that the school is aware of all of the compliance requirements. We want to make sure that if there's additional training, additional support that's needed, that we're here and able to do that. So please don't hesitate to reach out. We are not here to get you in trouble. We're here to make sure that you have whatever you need, to remain in compliance and to keep your students safe. So I'm not going to go through all of these documentation requirements. These are listed on this slide. They're also listed in the code and the rule, and then they're also part of the Qualtrics survey. But if you are unfamiliar with this, I would just make sure that you've looked this over and that you are familiar with what you have to document during an ESI. I'm going to skip through this. Move on to documentation storage and reporting. I'm sure you all know this, but the one I want to point out here is that any ESI documentation does become part of the student's educational record, and it must be recorded in the student information system. And right now, unfortunately, it does have to be recorded in two places, in the student information system and then also in the Qualtrics survey. And we are so sorry for that. We realize that it is a huge burden on a lot of the LEAs. The reason for that is it just takes a lot of time to recode these SIS systems so that they can accept the data that is required. We've been given an estimate of this upcoming summer, so summer 2026, that the SIS systems will hopefully be updated so that you will no longer have to complete both data entries, that you'll just have to do the SIS, and then that will collect all the information that we need. Okay, so this notification requirement is also brand new in the code. Prior to this, the parents had to be notified immediately of the use of an ESI, and then if it continued past 15 minutes, they would have to be notified. What it has been changed to is that the parents and the school administration must be notified of the use of an ESI immediately within 15 minutes after the use of an ESI. So it's no longer as soon as the ESI starts, it is within 15 minutes of the use of an ESI. So as soon as the ESI stops, then you do have 15 minutes then to reach out to parents and to school administrators. And that's not to say it can't be done earlier, but that's just the end deadline. And then the other piece on here that is new to a lot of people is that the school must provide any and all documentation, notes, Post-its, whatever it might be. Those have to be provided to the parents within 48 hours of the use of an ESI if they request it. If parents don't request it, you don't have to provide it. What we typically recommend for schools is that when you make this initial contact, the initial notification that an ESI was used, you let them know you have the right to contact us within the next 48 hours, and we will send you all of the documentation related to this ESI. And I would recommend doing that via email, but each school, again, has its own policies and procedures. So each school must have an ESI committee. The required members are listed here. Just make sure you're familiar with that because that has changed since in the past year. So make sure you're meeting these new requirements. And that is the end of ESIs. The rest of what we're going to talk about is school-based mental health. Are there any questions on any of that? I realize that was a lot of heavy information very quickly. Any questions on any of that before we move on to school-based mental health? Okay.
It was all great information though, Chrisanne.
Yeah, and I am so sorry. This is
great.
on a Friday afternoon and it's so much information to load you with. So we'll make sure that you have this slide deck and can refer back to it. But hopefully this was helpful and you learned at least something new.
I do have one quick question.
Yes.
This is Michael Spenlove from Bonneville Academy. Could
Hi.
you spend just, hello, could you spend just a moment talking about, and it was very quick, and I know you mentioned hand over hand with like scissors, but just a moment talking about physical escort versus physical restraint. I'd like a little bit of clarification on that.
That is a
Thank
really
you.
Great question. Thank you for asking. So a physical escort, let's say that you, when I used to work in a school, we called it a transport, where you have, maybe one person or more than one person who is physically moving the student from one place to another. And typically this is, I would strongly recommend that your staff be trained in evidence-based methods to do this, so you're not just picking up a student and, moving them. But the law has been clear that that is not considered an ESI. So both the Office for Civil Rights and Utah state law and federal law have confirmed that that does not need to be reported in the same way that a physical restraint would. So let's say that you have a student who's being disrupted in the classroom and it becomes necessary to move them from that space out into the hallway so that the other students can continue learning. That would not have to be reported in the same way that a physical seclusion would. Did that answer your question, Michael?
Very much so. Thank you.
Okay. Yep, you're welcome. Any other questions? All right. So let's talk about school-based mental health. There have been quite a few changes in the codes. There were quite a few very stress-inducing, I would say, changes that were made in the 2025 legislative session. And the two codes that I'm going to refer to are 53G 9901 and 902. These outline exactly what I'm going to be talking about here. And I'm going to try to hit some highlights rather than go through everything and go through maybe some of the more frequently asked questions. The first slide just outlines who school-based mental health professionals are considered. And this is, there's a very specific definition in the code of what a mental health professional or mental health therapist in a school is. And this includes people like school psychologists, school social workers, school counselors, school nurses are actually included. And then it also includes professionals like marriage and family therapists, people like that. And then school-based mental health professionals are unique in that they can have both a DOPL license and a USBE license. So if we take the example of a school social worker, they could be licensed through USBE and have an educator's license, or they could be also licensed through DOPL. We typically recommend that dual licensure just because it allows access to Cactus and just a little bit more funding abilities when you do have that educator's license. But that is not to say that a school couldn't hire a mental health therapist, a social worker, for example, who is just licensed through DOPL. Then the key requirements for school-based mental health therapist is that all of your school staff have to have the training on parental consent requirements. Again, those are outlined. You have a link here on the slide, so you can look those up in a little more detail. Prior written consent must be obtained before administering any psychological or psychiatric examination, test, or treatment. This is not anything new. This is something that is continuing from previous regulations, but again, I just want to point that out here. One of the differences that did come with the 2025 session is that the law is very clear that if it would pose a danger to the student, if we waited for parental consent, then the staff member can go ahead and provide an intervention. So an example of this would be if a student is self-harming. And then you maybe pulled in a school psychologist to help with de-escalation and to help with processing for that student. You do not have to wait to get parental permission before staff intervenes for obvious reasons. We don't want the student to continue harming themselves while we're waiting for a parent to respond. But in that case, if that does happen, you do want to make sure that you're notifying the parent as soon as possible after the event happens and then getting consent for future incidents that may happen. The law, the code that we're talking about, it also is very clear on the definition of restricted services. So those are very specifically defined as mental health services, and it outlines specific parameters for when parents need to be notified. One of the requirements that is included in here is that after each session of intervention, the parents do have to be notified of what was discussed. and when the session took place. So this is something that's a little bit new. So if you do have, school counselors, or more than likely it's going to be a school social worker or a school psychologist who are providing that type of intervention, that they are notifying the parent after each session. The parents do have a right to opt out of those notifications, and on your consent form, it should include that option to opt out of those notifications. And then on that note, before I forget, I do want to let you all know that we do have, USBE has developed a model consent form that you're welcome to use if you feel like that you need it. And it does include all of the legal requirements based off of this code. We're going to skip over this. We've already talked about it. I really have liked this visual. It outlines the difference between counseling services and then mental health services or mental health therapy, because there are very specific requirements now for each one. So counseling services are defined here. Basically, it is short-term and solution-focused counseling, classroom instruction, so whole class social emotional lessons, for example, crisis prevention and support. And then mental health therapy involves assessment and evaluation, diagnosis, and involves the development of a treatment plan. And then it also involves individual therapy. So restricted requirements, when getting permission for these restricted services to occur, you do have to give the parents the opportunity to identify topics that they would like discussed and that they would not like discussed during those interventions. And that, again, that does have to be part of your initial consent. So you want to make sure on that consent form that you've provided that opportunity. If the parents have said that you may not discuss a certain topic, so let's say they've asked you not to discuss the student's sexuality, then you are not allowed to address that topic at all. What we recommend saying is that this is not something that we're allowed to talk about. Let's contact your parents. And then I would notify the parents that the student brought that up during their session. There is an exception to restricted services that is specifically for students receiving special education services, either an IEP or a 504 plan. These students, for students outside of this definition, so general education students, group therapy is no longer allowed in the schools. So the student, any kind of mental health therapy cannot be provided in front of other students. Again, the exception is if the student has an IEP or a Section 504 plan, and if that IEP or 504 plan specifies that those services can be provided in front of other students. So you want to make sure that that's outlined pretty clearly in those documents if that's something that your school is providing. And then again, parental notification is required after each session. And then consent is generally required before the initial session with, of course, certain crisis and safety exceptions. Skipping through this, I had talked about a little bit earlier that group therapy or group intervention is something that is new to the code and is more closely regulated with the 2025 regulations. So group services are permitted if they're performed by licensed personnel and if they do not fall under the definition of mental health therapy. So some examples of this would be skill building. So you could do like a friendship group in a classroom, solution-focused counseling. That an example of that might be working on like emotional regulation skills. Support groups or crisis support. So if you have a grief group, that would be allowed. And then interpersonal behavioral or emotional regulation education. So basically your lunch bunch groups, your friendship groups, your social skills groups, those are all still allowed to be provided in a group as long as they don't meet that definition of a restricted service. And then restricted services cannot be provided in a group, again, unless it is designated in an IEP and 504 plan. This does not include stress management strategies or educating students or families about the availability of services at the school or for crisis response. Those are the only exceptions. All right, we do recommend separate consent forms for counseling services and for school-based mental health therapy services. Outline the requirements here. Again, you can read over those if this is new information to you. Services that do require informed parental consent are here. So therapy, assessments, screenings, any kind of psychological assessment, which is not new, counseling services, all 504 and IEP services, of course, require informed parental consent. Any of the protected topics, which we'll talk about here just a second. And then this is new, that the CTE and the Utah School Counseling Surveys do require parental consent. And then anything that is related to early warning system, school climate, or social emotional questions require consent at enrollment, at registration. They, again, this is a question we get pretty frequently, but the consent cannot be obtained later in the school year. It has to be obtained during registration. So you want to keep that in mind, that you can't include any kind of school climate survey later on in the school year if parents have not been already given that opportunity to consent during registration. Okay, there are lots of other services that are not considered mental health therapy that are critical to student support. The one that we get most asked about, most often are suicide prevention or education groups. And those are not considered under the umbrella of mental health therapy. So those are allowed and do not require parental consent. So if you have an assembly or a classroom lesson on suicide prevention, you do not have to receive parental consent prior to doing that. Consent procedures during a crisis. I think we've talked about this quite a bit, but you do not have to wait for that consent in a crisis situation, but you do have to notify the parents as soon as possible after that has happened. And then if support services continue, so let's say that the student is self-harming and then the school determines that mental health therapy services should continue in order to support the student, then that consent is required for any kind of continued service. And then your protected topics are listed here. Again, these are not new. These have already been in code. These have been in code for several years, but I just want to, again, provide this list to you just in case you are not familiar with it. You do have to have permission before discussing any of these protected topics. And again, the model consent form that USBE has does include all of these items in it. We've covered suicide, so but I do want to point out that it does not require a licensed mental health therapist to ask questions or to do what we call a quick suicide assessment. So any school employee, if they are concerned, can ask a student if they are considering suicide or if they've had suicidal thoughts. If there is a concern after having asked those questions after that initial assessment, then you do want to pass that on to someone who's trained, to a licensed personnel, in order to do additional intervention. But any school employee, a paraprofessional, a teacher, an administrator, anybody can step in and ask a student questions about suicide or self-harm in order to maintain that student's safety. All right, so this is the end. We're done just a few minutes early. I hope that's okay with you all. But I have included a really long list here of a lot of the resources that we have talked about during this presentation. So there's links to the board rules and to the code. And then there's also links to the policy and procedures checklist. I've also included a link to our foundational behavior support model training and the Canvas course in case you want to use that for your school. And then there's also links to the Qualtrics survey here. All right, before I finish up, here is my contact information. Feel free to reach out. I do love hearing from schools. Even if you just want to say hi, you're welcome to reach out. I would love it. But if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. That's what our job is. That's why we're here, in order to help provide that support. So my contact information is here. And I am just very grateful that you all allowed me to talk to you today. And any questions before we finish up?
I don't see any, Chris Ann. I've been looking at the chat, but I wanted to say thank you so much. It was very helpful, very informative. And everything will be uploaded on our YouTube channel also. The checklist that you're talking about, is that available on the USB website or?
Yes. It
Okay.
also, let me go to the previous slide. The policy checklist is also linked. I don't know if you can see my cursor,
can.
but it's also linked right here. So if
Okay.
you just click on this, then you should be able, that should come straight up. And it's also on our behavior support webpage.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for participating. I appreciate it. Like I said, everything will be uploaded on our YouTube channel. If you missed something or you need something, you want to refer back to the YouTube channel, that's fine. Or you can reach out to me also. Thank you again for all my presenters. I appreciate it. And everyone have a wonderful weekend and safe, and we will see you again in February.
Thank you. Are you able to email out the YouTube link?
Yes, I'll go ahead and do that.
That, and then and I've got one link for the first slideshow, but will there be a definite link for the slideshow that was just presented, along with the other links for contacts and resources?
Yes, I can do that. It'll probably be next week. We'll have it all ready for you to go.
That's fine. Thank you very much
Oh, no,
for
thank you. I
everything.
appreciate it. Have a wonderful weekend.
You too.
Anybody else have questions? Wonderful. Thank you.